Hello, everyone. The Authors Guild Foundation welcomes you to today's event in our Money Matters series, Know Your Worth and Charge It. This is about setting fair freelance rates. Our host, Erin Lowry, is here with returning guest Uchechi Kalu, and the two of them will be diving into some key fundamentals today and in a couple of more events over the next month or so. So stay tuned for those. My name is Johnny, and I'll just say quickly at the Authors Guild, we support our members with legal advice and tons of benefits like website services, member only events, among so much more. But at the Authors Guild Foundation, our charitable arm, we support all authors in the US, anyone publishing in the US, with educational programming like this and through our advocacy work on issues ranging from book banning to AI practices. So thanks, as always, to the Foundation's donors. Their generosity helps us do this for free for any writer who needs it. And you can learn more about all our work at authorsguild.org. Thanks to our audience for the questions you sent in. Erin and Uchechi have incorporated a lot of that into the presentation, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A box at any time. I'll say, as a brief introduction, Uchechi Kalu is a Nigerian-American writer and a certified financial planner based in Los Angeles. Her writing work explores the shifting nature of Blackness, Americanness, and Africanness across borders, shaped by her experiences living on 6 continents. She was a 2024 Paris Olympics Poetry Fellow, and she has received support for her work from PEN America. Erin Lowry, as you may know, is the author of the four-part Broke Millennial series of books. She and her work have been featured widely in print, online, and in television, and she's a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. I'll say briefly on AI. I know we received a few questions of how people are dealing with that. It's definitely a shifting landscape. I'm seeing many people, touting that their work is made by a human. I think that there's a way as a freelance writer to, emphasize the value of human writing, human fact checking, compared to AI work, and so much more. But obviously, we don't have totally firm answers about how the landscape has changed in the long run. But in any case, we've got experts on the topic for today. Erin, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny. Hi, everyone. Wonderful to be back with you. And we are very excited for the conversation that we have prepared for you today. Now, we thought one way that would be interesting for everyone to kick things off is to share stories of our own. I don't know, maybe I'll use the word failures when it comes to understanding what our rates should be and knowing our worth and charging it. And one of my favorite examples to use from my own personal experience, and it sounds very extreme, but this would have been about 8 or so years ago. And part of the work that I do and was doing at the time were speaking engagements based on talking about personal finance. Not dissimilar to today, but this one was an in person speaking engagement across the country. I live in New York City. I had to fly to Seattle for this particular speaking event. It was going to be a panel discussion that also had a little brand partnership kind of work, like share stuff on Instagram type of thing. Now, it was if the universe was trying to control for me to teach me a lesson that on the same panel was another woman, approximately my age, similar years of experience, and a personal friend of mine who did the exact same type of work I did. We actually flew together from JFK to Seattle. And that night, we went out to dinner before the panel, and I worked up the nerve, may or may not have had a cocktail or two, but worked up the nerve to ask her, hey, how much did you charge for this whole event? And she looked at me and said, oh, I charged $10,000. And I went, oh, okay, I charged $3,500. So that, and we were doing the exact same amount of work. And so that to me was this instant moment of a learning curve, one on how much the market would bear at the time for that kind of work, but also the incredible importance to talking to people who do the similar kind of work that you do in order to get a real sense of what you should charge and what the market would bear. So I'm going to stop. We'll probably come back to this story, but I'm going to stop here for now.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Erin, because yeah, that happens where you're like, what? Did I just not negotiate this? But it's also hard, I know folks are there listening and be like, how will I ever know? And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. My name is Uchechi Kalu, and I'm a certified financial planner. And if you know anything about financial planning, it usually tends to skew toward those that are high net worth or ultra high net worth. And so just because of my own varied background, I always really wanted to provide services for folks that were not in those categories. But I found that there were times where I would charge a little bit too little. And I'm thinking about one person who I still really adore, but I gave them a fee. They paid for it. What I found in myself was that I was resentful. Like I was doing the full service work. And I'm sure that some of you have been in this situation where you've given someone a discount because you really wanted to work with them and you really wanted to serve them. And you gave them everything. You did everything. You pulled out every stop that you know that they needed. And still at the end, when we finished working, she was like, oh, that's nice. And I think it didn't sink in at all. And I realized that a part of it was that like it just wasn't at a price point where they really had to engage and see it as the investment in themselves that it was. And that was a very, very good wake-up call for me of like, charge the thing that you need to charge, not just because you need to be compensated, but also you want your clients to want to be there. You want your clients to be engaged. You want your clients to find value. And so I would rather have a few clients who pay exactly what the cost is and have rave reviews and want to come back or want to refer me than folks who've paid less and are like, oh, that's nice, and will never talk about it again, might think that it wasn't a really good use of their money and their time, and then it's not fruitful for anyone. So I've learned that lesson and I've stuck to my guns around that going forward. And I'm pretty happy about the results for sure.
Now, we are going to get in a little later in this conversation to a bit of the nitty gritty about how to ask some of the questions, who to talk to, how to ask, how much do you make? How much do you charge? But what's really important to assess first is the cost of being you. You have to, know how much you need as the first piece of the puzzle and information about how to go out there and what to charge. So we're going to first dig into the formula and understanding a little bit of the nuance about the cost of being you.
Okay, so I'm gonna hop in and take this. So there are a few things I wanna say at first is that I know that the word budgeting or budget is like the boogeyman. Um, and so I'm not gonna use that here, but when we think about the cost of being you, this is like how much money does it take to be Uchechi? How much money does it truly take to be Erin? How much money does it really truly take to run your life? This is foundational to making any decisions about what you need to bring in and earn in your business. And I think very often we don't even think about this very much. We just think about a budget, like I need to pay my rent, I need to pay my utilities. But for a lot of us, that's not the bulk of our life, you know? You still travel, there's still entertainment, there's still that friend who's always asking for money, or like your mom needs something, your dad needs something, or you donate in your community, or you're involved in this, or you're involved in that. Like all of that is the full cost of being you in this world. And I think folks would be actually a little bit surprised at how much it really costs to maintain the lifestyle that they have. But in order to determine what your rate should be as a freelancer, you have to know how much you need at least to break even. Okay. So as we start to unpack this topic, I want you to think about this in like the order of importance. The first thing we want to determine is the cost of being you. That's your total personal annual cash flow needs. Okay. Or better known as budget, but let's forget about that. The second, after that, then we can determine what your pre-tax salary needs are. And then from there, you can determine how many hours you need to work to meet that goal. And I also want to put out there that you might do this and realize that your business as it's set up cannot meet those goals. That you might need additional income, or you might need more support from your partner, or you might need to increase your rates, right? Like this process, I always want to say it is a process of introspection, of getting really, really clear about what it is that your life takes, what it is that you need to provide. And so here's the actual calculation of the cost of being you. We want to look at your fixed expenses, your fixed monthly expenses, and then your fixed non-monthly expenses. So that's going to be like your car insurance is usually every 6 months, things like that, maintenance, registration that shows up. And then also your taxes is in that. cost of being you. And then lastly, your savings. I always say that savings is a core piece. It's not an afterthought. It's already a core piece of you living your life and living it well. So once you calculate all four of those things, then you can drop down to the next formula that we have here for your true salary needs for the year. If you could go back just 1 second. Yeah. And so now we have that full cost of being you. That's your fixed monthly expenses, fixed non-monthly expenses, your taxes, and all of your savings, retirement contributions for the year, plus your business expenses. That becomes your total annual cash needs for folks. You want to divide that by 1 minus your tax rate. I feel like I'm a math teacher with this equation, but that whole equation is going to show you how much you truly need in order to survive. Okay. Now, once you have your full on pre-tax salary needs, divide that by your hourly rate that you already have, if that's how you're charging, and you're going to find out how many hours you're going to need to work. And from there, you can be really honest with yourself about whether your current service model is serving you and serving your life. You can go to the next slide. Okay. And so here is some of the things we mentioned in terms of the total cash needs, your monthly needs, non-monthly needs that are fixed, debt payment, sorry, I'm going to add that as well, savings and investing, as we mentioned. This is post-tax, investing, spending, and giving. All of these things all together, and then any other sort of miscellaneous costs are the things that you want to consider for that cost of being you. And then we have a breakdown as well here that if you're looking at it on your screen right now, just take a screenshot of this. And you can use this as a way to run that calculation. And so, sorry, I misspoke before. You're not going to calculate your taxes. You actually don't need to do that. It'll show up in your final equation. Okay.
And I do want to talk one thing about taxes because, and I haven't checked questions, maybe this question already came in. People often ask, what tax rate? What tax rate do I use? So there are two things that I want people to consider. The first is the fact that, you can just go to the IRS website, figure out what the cost is for you based on all of your information, irs.gov, Gov. Please do not go to .com, .org, .co. Those are not the real ones, but irs.gov actually has a lot of layman's term, great information. If you've tuned into these before, you've probably heard me actually reference that. So that's one option. There's plenty of banks and other resources that share tax rates. But you also could rule of thumb it. And the rule of thumb that I personally like to adhere to sounds really hefty. It's 40%. And the reason I tell people that if you want to keep it like really clean, really easy, every time you get paid, put 40% aside into its own account, depending on how you're structured. If you're structured as an S corporation and have to have a business account, you leave it where it is and you just keep it in mental math. But if you're not, if you have the ability to move 40% into its own savings account, a high yield savings account, nickname it something like Uncle Sam's money, whatever you want to call it, so that you remember what that's for. But the reason I recommend 40% is because even if you're in a high tax area, even if you, live in a city/state that does city, state, and federal taxes, and you have your business taxes on top of everything, there still should be some left over that also can be forced savings for yourself for retirement accounts. So that's one of the reasons I recommend going to a number that feels painfully high to some people, because hopefully not only do you have enough to cover all of your bases, anytime quarterly taxes come up, you're not like, oh no, I forgot. But you also have money set aside that you can put money into, whether it's a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, a SEP IRA, a solo 401k. There are so many options that we have discussed before in previous webinars that we will send in the follow-up email that we send. Right. So the other thing too that when we were planning this, we were kind of chatting about different ways that we set rates. And one thing two pieces of advice I love. One, I had a friend once say to me, we as freelancers tend to always undervalue our work, whether particularly for creatives, whether it's because of our mindset, particularly if you suffer from scarcity mindset, or maybe we just don't see the real value of our work. So she recommends whatever number you come up with, tack on 15%. And I always really liked that idea. Now, if you have figured out what the market will bear, you've done the research, you've talked to the people, maybe 15% is going to price you too high. only you can answer that question for yourself. But if maybe you know in your gut you have a tendency to undervalue yourself, whatever number you come up with, add another 15%. But the other one that I like to do, based on personal experience, is what I would call a pain and suffering tax. So if you are taking on a client that you get the sense, or you know from personal experience, or a friend has told you, it's just going to be a bit of a pain to work with, whether it's because they require a lot of meetings. Maybe they want you to onboard through a very particular kind of portal and process that, you know, in addition to all the work you're doing, you're going to have to learn this whole new way of submitting work or editing or writing or what have you. There are so many different reasons why a client might demand a pain and suffering tax. Obviously, we're not sharing that information with them, whether it's 5%, 10%, whatever you want to tack on. But if you know this person is going to cause you an additional amount of frustration, just charge a little more.
And I'll add something to that of another strategy with pricing, because I've found that pricing, a lot of it has to do with actually educating your client or educating your prospect as to what it is that you do that fits their needs. And so, very often when I'm having a prospect call or discovery call with someone and I get them to identify what it is that they want to happen, and a follow-up email or even in the conversation, if we have time, then I'll isolate like Danny wants X. I provide Y, and this is exactly what will happen. Danny wants this. This is exactly what I provide. Danny wants that. This is exactly what I provide. And I allow what they've shared as to what they want to then guide how I describe my service. Because ultimately, what it doesn't really matter what I call what I do. It matters what you call what I do if you want to work with me. And I find that the more that I can have people feel that I'm providing exactly what it is that they want, price becomes not so important as much as the value. And we're going to talk more and more in our conversation today about how to make sure that you're showing your value. But when people find something to be genuinely valuable, price becomes not as much of an issue. And so when you're tacking in that 15% and you're tacking on that pain and suffering, show them exactly why having those extra meetings is going to be valuable for the thing that they say that they want to do. And it makes it a little bit easier then to have the price conversation.
Before we transition to the next section, I see in the Q&A that a lot of people are asking to see the second slide that we put up because they didn't feel like they had enough time with it. So giving everyone a warning, I'm about to pull that up. So if you want to take your screenshot, all right, here we go. Pulling it up. I'll put it on for full slide. Cost of being you, just to reiterate, total cash needs, and taking a look at what each line means. So either grab your phone, snap the picture, screenshot on your computer. All right. This is going away in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you, everyone. And again, feel free if there's something that we put up and you feel like, oh no, I didn't get enough time, I need to go back, just drop it in the comments and we will go back to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I also saw both in the Q&A, but also some of the pre-submitted questions we received, there were a lot of questions about how do we figure out comp rates? How do we figure out what the market would bear? And obviously figuring out your personal needs, your bare minimum, is really only one piece of this puzzle. You need to know how much other people charge in order to ensure that you yourself are not undercutting yourself. Because even if the cost of being you is modest, maybe you've run the calculation and you've realized like, oh, I actually only need to earn like $45,000 a year in order to live my life. That's great. But I bet your talents could exceed that number. So it's really important for us to be able to communicate with other freelancers and writers about how much they earn. So one of the questions that came in was, how do you know what are comparable rates for assignments so that you are in the ballpark with other freelancers? Uchechi, did you want to say something first?
Yeah, I want to add something to what you said is that even if I want folks to consider this, that especially when you're a freelancer, you are competing with your peers, right? But at the same time, you don't want to even if your cost of being you is lower and you're like, all I need is this, and I know I can make that. You also want to recognize sometimes that if you do undercut yourself, you're undercutting your entire industry. So sometimes, very often, keeping a consistent rate, like Erin just mentioned about that there was someone who was like, I'm charging $10,000 for you to fly me across the country, be on a panel, share my expertise in this way, versus 3,500. It actually helps Erin that that person is charging 10K because that means that next time she's in the room, she can charge that. And so, I know that we're always out there trying to get business, but I really want folks to think about how maintaining actually a higher cost helps everybody in the game. And you might experience this where, folks are experiencing this now with AI and it being completely free, basically. But I'm sure that there are folks that do your job that are like on Fiverr and are charging like $5 or $3 or whatever. And you're like, oh God, look at these people. Like, that kind of sucks. That like kind of sucks. So there is something about maintaining the overall value of your industry by charging what you charge. Erin, can you repeat your question? That just was really on my heart to say.
So the question that came in was, how do you know what are comparable rates for assignments so that
Oh,
you are in the ballpark with other freelancers? And we saw a lot of iterations of this question because it is one of the biggest things that we all have to answer. So we're going to go through a
mm,
few different strategies about
yeah,
how to do the research and ask. But
yeah,
before we do that, it is really important to also talk about the who. Who should you be asking? And what I want to tie back to with my previous story is I made the joke that, the universe had controlled all these factors for me. And I say that because this was somebody who was so similar to my situation in terms of what her job title was, how many years she had in the field, what her credentials were, our ages even. We were both women. Like it felt as if so much was controlled for that sometimes are the reasons that like, okay, if that person has 3 more books than I do, then all right, understandable. Maybe they command a higher rate. Or, and I know this is frustrating, if that person has 50,000 more followers on social media, and depending on what the job is, sometimes they command a higher rate. But the fact that everything was controlled for me in the situation, we were so similar, down to social media account. If anything, I had a bit of an edge. And that showed me that I was so undercharging. So when it comes to figuring out who to ask, it can be great to ask people who are further along if you have connections with those people. But what's more important is assessing who is very similar to your situation. Now, I also want to point out that it's really important to not, like, if you're a woman, don't just ask women, also ask men, particularly if you think there might be some sort of wage gap that's happening in your industry, specifically what you do. You want to ask people across a spectrum, but you want to make sure that you're asking people that have similar credentials and do similar work in order to really understand what the market's going to bear.
yeah. And, to that, I think what we'll talk a little bit about is how to do like informational interviews, even how to go about that process. Because it's a little bit twofold. Like you can ask people that are on the same playing field as you to understand where you are right now. And if you already have some vision as to where you want to go, you can ask people that are a little bit more down the line so that you know even what your track is. Like you might have an inflated idea of what's possible in your field, and then you meet someone 10 years down the line that's doing super well, and you're like, oh, well, that's the cap. Okay, fine. You know what I mean? So it can work in both ways. So let's say one, if you are traditionally employed, ask someone who does the same type of work as you. Maybe they work at the same or similar company. If you're like, okay, I don't want to be sleeping around my own company, that's fine. Um, but if it was a colleague that left or someone that's been promoted, someone who even hires for that role is a really good person to ask, what should I be expecting at this stage? What should I be expecting at the next stage? And I know that there was someone in the comments who asked, like, oh, I'm very young, and so I can't even imagine earning that kind of money. So I think that's why I undersell myself. I think for you, and I've actually experienced this even with some of my own clients. Like I mentioned, I work in financial planning. So some people I work with are much higher net worth than I could have ever imagined as someone. Like I'm a first gen American. I grew up in the rural South. And so I'll meet clients who are killing it in their lives, and they're like amazing people. And I'm like, shit, I gotta step up my game. Okay, what's up? Right. So that's for you. If you feel like, I've never even made that kind of money, this is why it's really, really good to talk to people and see where they are in their life, because it'll start to expand your idea of what's even possible. And similarly, if you are a freelancer, look for people with similar credentials. Um, and we have these two slides. Do you want to show them about how to do these
Yes.
informational interviews?
Right.
And as she's bringing that up, I will say, I think it's okay to be sneaky, because people, as we know, we're having this conversation about money right now, but people are not always so open to talk about it. So if you were like, what are freelancers charging in my area? Pose as someone who's looking for those services, and get like 5 to 10 answers, and then you can take the median of that and see what's going on if you find that people aren't as open. So Erin, do you want to take these slides?
Yes. Well, I'll let you have this one because this
Oh
was your
yeah.
script on the informational interview, and then I'll go
Yes.
to the other strategies.
Okay. Yeah, so information interview, this is one I direct people to all the time, and you can use this script. I'm just always like, hey, X, I'm currently looking for this, either this position or this company. This is a more like formal thing, so maybe you work for a company, this would help you. And would like to share a little bit more about what I'm looking for. Do you have 15 minutes on this date to brainstorm anyone you think I should connect with? I've already blocked up time in my calendar in case you can make it then. Just going to tell you a few things about why psychologically this works. One, you're identifying someone that is strategic. So that's a really good thing. So they might already be able to make connections in their own head as to why to work with you. But here's the next part. I don't, at least in the first correspondence, I don't just put a calendar link, because we are so inundated with having meetings that you going ahead and saying, I have 15 minutes on this day and I've set it out for you, it takes this huge load off of someone. They're able just to look at their calendar and say, I have this time or I don't have this time. And if they don't, usually folks then respond saying, I'm not available. How about X? I find that this is way more, I will way more quickly get an answer of a yes or a no or a maybe than, hey, I want to chat. Here's a calendar link. Can you click it and do it on your own? So that's number one strategically. Number two, the part where it says, we're going to brainstorm anyone that you think I should connect with. I find this to be very helpful. One, because folks love to be helpful, really love to be helpful. And secondly, if you feel that your network is small, that's okay. But everyone that you know knows someone. So if you're even like introverting, like, I don't really know how to get out there, I don't really know who I should be talking to or who to start these conversations with. The people that you know have networks of other people, and that's how you can start to build connections exponentially. And sometimes I found in these informational interviews that the person I'm talking to actually has an opportunity for what it is that I need. So it's kind of like a way to like soft launch the thing that you're looking for, the thing that's going on. And they're like, oh, I've been thinking about that too, right? So there are a lot of reasons why this particular template really works well. And I hope that you can use it for yourself. How about you, Erin?
And on the informational interview, before we pivot to other strategies, I think sometimes, and I feel like I can already sense people thinking, well, how do I find these people? Who do I turn to? Cold pitching on forums like LinkedIn, you would be surprised. As mentioned, people love to be helpful. Also, people love to talk about themselves. You would be surprised how often just reaching out, even cold pitching someone you don't know, but maybe has information for you, could be helpful. Getting into any forums, like the ones that the Authors Guild have, maybe it's an alumni network from your university, all sorts of other writers forums that exist. Those are also places, especially also freelancing forums, where you can reach out to people to ask if they would be willing to do an informational interview. Those are also resources if you do not know in your day-to-day life a bunch of other freelancers who would be able to help you and give you information about rates. Those are also forums and places that you can go to. Now, speaking of talking to other people, I want to go through two different strategies. First, one of my personal favorites, the over-under strategy. This is actually a real life email with a little bit of personal info redacted about who the clients were. But I received this email once from somebody that I knew within freelancing. We weren't super close, we just knew of each other. And she said, "Hi, Erin. Hope all is well with you. I have been a regular contributor to the Fake Company blog for about a year and a half now. I noticed you've done some writing for the Alias Company blog. I just renegotiated rates with my contact there and wasn't sure if I charged enough. At the risk of coming off blunt, might I ask what rate you charged? If you don't feel comfortable giving a specific number, was it under or over $600 for about 1,000 words? Did you include sharing out to your social media platforms in the rate?" I loved this email so much because, first of all, it utilizes a very important strategy when you're trying to get financial information out of somebody else. This over under idea of, this is the number. Do you make over or under this number? And the reason that's really helpful is it keeps people from having to bluntly respond, "Hey, for the exact amount of work that you just described, I actually charge $1,000. That was my response because I have no issue giving the direct information, but I could have just said, "Oh, for what you're describing, I actually charge more than that." Now, she always can counter. One of the beauties of the over under strategy is you can counter back, "Okay, so could you tell me, was it over or under 800? Was it over or under 1,000?" The other thing I love about this email specifically is not only did she use the over under strategy, but she tried to control for other things that could have increased my rate. For instance, did you include sharing out on your social media platforms in the rate? Because maybe I responded to her and said, "Oh, for what you're describing, I charged $1,000 for 1,000 words, roughly $1 a word." But if I didn't also include, and I did a social share on then Twitter and Instagram, and I have a following of X, that's something that really could drive up the rate. So if for her it was just $600 for 1,000 words, but no social shares, that actually might be roughly comparable to my $1,000 for a similar amount of writing. But in addition, I also shared on socials. So trying to, in any sort of contact that you're making with somebody, control not only for exactly what the rate would be for an amount of writing, but for a specific job, but trying to figure out, is there any other thing that person could be doing that allows them to increase their rate? The beauty of that too is you start to learn what are things that you could be doing, additional benefits that you could be offering a client in order to increase your rate. So in addition to the over under strategy, another thing I really like are just this 3-sentence script to talk about salary with somebody. So one, and it's pretty similar to the informational interview script as well. But it starts with, "I'm doing research because," and it could be, "I'm negotiating with a new client, I'm trying to raise my rates, I just got an offer at a new job," whatever your reason. 2, "and I think you have some information that could help me." And if you want, you could even clarify what that information is. "I think you have some information that could help me because we seem to do similar writing." 3, "would you be willing to share your ballpark salary with me?" Or alternatively, you could ask, "would you be willing to share what you think I should be asking for?" Now, obviously, we would probably want to adjust the term ballpark salary to ballpark rate. It's also incredibly helpful to sometimes just use that alternate of, "would you be willing to share what you think I should be asking for?" Because someone may be more inclined to tell you to charge a better rate than to necessarily share what they themselves are charging. And again, if they come back and are a little like, "well, I'm just not really comfortable sharing my rate," you could then try to counter with the over under. "Okay, totally understand. Do you just mind telling me, do you charge over or under $500 for a 600 word piece?" So those are 2 other strategies that you can use to try to be asking people about their salary. So I'm going to take this away in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Fantastic. So I think we're going to start shifting and talking about how to increase your value, right? Because whether you are undercharging or whether even you're charging what you need to charge, inflation is still real. We're already feeling it in our everyday lives, and we will continue to feel it as times change. And so you will need to increase your prices. But I find that if you're in a business where you're constantly actually increasing just the price, It goes from 50 to 55, 55 to 60, 60 to 65 an hour, if that's how you're charging. Um, Clients can get really like, they can feel really icky about it. And it's the same way that like you go to the store and you're like, wasn't that cereal like $3 yesterday and now it's four, right? We can be a little bit price sensitive. So a way to combat that is to actually have people understand the value that you are providing them. So that no matter when you have to change your price, they still feel that the value is worth it. So we're going to talk about this. One way to increase your value, and I think this is really, it's so simple and yet I think really hard for creatives, right? Like we're coming here as like writers, as people who are just kind of like going with the flow, the vibe of life. Um, but when you have clients, when you have prospects, you need to be incredibly professional. And that is one way to really stand out as a creative in this field, as a freelancer. Be uber professional, communicate well, communicate on time, follow up, be reliable, have clear processes. I can't even hone in on this enough of like when your client can see the journey that they're on, it is much easier for them to pay for something, especially if they don't quite understand what the product is. Like for financial planning, most people don't quite understand what it is. So I have to take them through, like, this is step one, two, three, four, or five, and help educate them on what it is. And that helps increase your value as well, having a clear process. If you want to increase your value, really utilize your experience and the efficiency of it, right? So maybe there are people who are paying that who are charging $15 an hour, but it takes them 10 hours to do a task. And the folks that are paying 400 an hour and they do it actually in 30 minutes, right? If that's you, charge more. People do want efficient service. And if you can provide that, bake that into your rate. As I mentioned before, in order to increase your value in your proposals, if that's how you communicate with clients or prospects, tie your services directly to what they said the ideal outcome is. And I really want to in on this as well, because very often in our industries, we have our idea of what clients want and our idea of what clients need. That does not matter, right? If you grow apples and your clients say, I want an orange, but I want to buy it from you, that apple is an orange. Like you have to start talking about your work in a way that your clients can understand and that they want. Okay. And last tip here is, at least in this section, is that if you can get your clients to identify the monetary change that they seek, this can really help as well because people really are motivated by money. And so if you're like, well, if I do this, you're going to see X in your pocketbook or X in your company or X in your life, it's a lot harder for folks to walk away from that. Um, Finessing that can be really difficult, actually. But if you can find ways to get those answers out of, I want to have this much more by working with you, then as well as you're writing out those proposals and as you're making clear what your service is, you can also make it clear that there's a monetary value to your service.
You know, I feel that really dovetails nicely with a question we had come in that was talking about a potential client who had money to burn, as described by the asker, and that this woman, the potential client, was saying she also contacted a ghostwriting service, for example, a book mill. She clearly was trying to get the asker to drop her rate for this project. Ultimately, the client went with presumably the mill, didn't go with the asker. So any thoughts about how to work around these companies which are undercutting freelancer bids? And that point of trying to illustrate the quality of
Mhm.
your work and the fact that if you go the first time around with high quality work, it's going to save them both time and money on the other side of not
Mhm.
having to go through as extensive edits, not having to go find somebody else to punch up the copy. You know, try to figure out and hone in on where you have the competitive edge over somebody who is maybe even using ChatGPT to do a first draft. And
Mhm.
why, if you do that, first of all, it can hallucinate and give you incorrect information,
First.
but you also are probably going to have to hire somebody to make that copy better. And
Mhm.
instead, why don't you just cut that middle part out and hire the person that's going to create a wonderful product from the beginning? Now you can finesse that however you want to make it not sound like you're coming at your client for potentially shopping around. but really figure out what is your competitive edge and trying to illustrate that to clients. But we also have to understand that sometimes clients are just going to simply go with what was
Yes.
cheapest. And
Yeah.
I know this is a flippant way to say they probably weren't the client for you. But if they're just going to go with what's cheapest, that doesn't mean that you should have to drop your rate to meet them there. It means you
Yeah.
should take the time that you would have been focused on that project to find a better client, which is
Yeah.
much easier said than done. I understand that.
Absolutely. And one way that you can start to, if you're finding this to be a pattern, you might also then find that the kind of client that you're attracting might have some similarities. And so I always recommend this is like look at your client base, the people that you've already worked with. What is similar about them and that you loved about them? How can you find more of those people? If you're finding more folks that are just trying to undercut you or undersell you, what's very similar about them and how can we not attract as many of them? Some people just are really price sensitive. And like that just isn't going to change. I think another thing we haven't talked about as well is that when a prospect is coming through, part of why they want to be there with you is emotional. So if you can also help them identify the, if it's the peace of mind that they want, if it's the lack of confusion, if it's that like they've been working on this thing for 20 years and they just need to get it off their chest. If you can identify that emotional piece as well and have them trust you from that perspective, it also really helps in terms of providing value because emotional relief is pretty priceless.
I want to talk about one more thing in here, and this is the idea of being a T-shaped professional, which I'll bring up the slide in a moment. But because then we're going to pivot to talking a little bit about negotiation before we want to open up for at least a few more questions at the end. So we're going to talk just quickly. And again, I feel like all of this dovetails beautifully with that question of figuring out how to kind of expand our offering as well.
Yeah. So this is a concept that I've come across recently and I've really loved it. Because very often when we're talking about, how do we earn more money in our businesses, it's talked about niching, right? Find your niche, dig into your niche. But I'm sure what a lot of folks are experiencing right now is that like, but what if my niche disappears? What if AI eats my niche, right? Like, or you feel this fear of like, what if I niche so specifically, but there's not enough business there? Or it just kind of dwindles down. So, being a T-shaped professional, if we think about a T, right, you have the bar on top and then the bar on the bottom. The idea of the T shape is actually to have a more diversified business. And so, the top bar is actually being a generalist, like having some really important skills that support your expertise. And so if you're a copywriter, maybe there's some editing skills that could support your expertise. Branding comes in with clients, marketing comes in with clients. You do not need to be an expert about it, but it's really good to have a general knowledge of. And then the T, or the really like line that goes down, that's your deep expertise. That's your core skills. And so all of this makes you a pretty well-rounded professional. You're not just a jack of all trades. Like, actually, that's not very helpful in any kind of business. You do still want to be known for something. But if a client comes to you, and I think this is what happens a little bit more often, is that a client comes to you and they're actually looking for a few things, but you only provide one thing. And they can't justify necessarily paying you and then paying a lot of other people. And so they find the place where they can undercut one part of the service, and then they end up paying one other person for who can provide a few things, right? So think about your industry, think about the folks who are coming to you and what they're really asking for. And is there a way for you to keep on being an expert in what you're doing, but provide the other services that you know that folks can want so that they can stay with you and you become a little bit more diversified as a service provider?
Another thing to consider when it comes to being a T-shaped professional is that that is all important. But in addition, can you create a T-shaped network for yourself? So if you
Mm,
are not the person who can provide all of XYZ that maybe somebody needs, but
yeah.
you have the deep bench network resource that if a client comes to you and you say, I can provide all of this for you, and then I can also refer you to vetted people that I trust, that I know, that former clients of mine have used for ABC while I'm doing XYZ, it also solves a pain point for them, and a pain point that maybe they didn't even realize existed. Which, again, when we're competing against things like a book mill now, that's where you can kind of start to develop yourself as an agency solution to this other problem that's being had, but yours is of higher caliber and higher quality. So that's
Yeah,
another way to try to be competitive as well.
that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true.
But when we think about negotiating with clients, so now we've figured out our price, how much we need, the cost of being you. We've done some research to gather the data of what the market will bear, what other freelancers charge. You're starting to hone in on your area of expertise. Now we have to put it all into action and negotiate with those clients.
Yes.
And we had quite a few pre-submitted questions about this. And one of them that immediately spoke to me was, is it okay to change your prices every year? How can I keep from losing that customer if the price is off? So we kind of have a twofer. But first of all, I just want to say, every organization I feel like we interact with as consumers raise their prices every year. Whether that is your internet provider, your cell phone provider, the cost of cable, the streaming services, the cost of books go up. Like everything seems to go up, and inflation's wild.
Yes.
So, yeah, not only for that reason, that honestly, the regular consumer is conditioned for prices to go up, but also it's been a year. Your skill set has improved. What you're offering is better. So, why should you be charging the exact same price for now the fact that you're even better at your job? So, that's the first thing that I just want to bring up is this notion of back to knowing your worth and charging it. That also includes raising your prices, even though that sometimes feels a little scary. Now, the idea too of how can I keep from losing that customer if the price is off? Again, we've gone over a few times this idea of making sure that you know what your value is, being very clear with your client about the value that you're offering. Now, if a client counters you, that's your choice about whether or not you want to negotiate about giving them a little discount on the new rate, whether you want to keep them at, let's say now, like a friends and family rate, because maybe they're a good client, they're a legacy client, they've been with you. That's a matrix that you have to figure out for yourself. But the other thought is how much notice to give your client. So as somebody who works with people on sort of an annual basis, Uchechi, I'm curious, how much notice do you give or how much notice do you recommend other people give?
Oh, this is really good. You never want it to sneak up on anyone. You know, we're also consumers and we hate like just looking at like I feel like every 6 months my auto insurance is just like, hey, the price went up. You're like, what? And I don't know what to do about it. I would definitely, if you work with clients one-on-one, it's a few things. I would give them at least 3 to 6 months in advance and many meetings, right? So I tend to meet with clients a few times a year or many times a year, depending on the engagement. So it might be in February, and I'm like, hey, next year, this part of the service is going to change. So when I meet with them again in April, I'm like, great. And I just want to remind you that X part of the service is going to change. We meet in October, X part of the service is going to change because people don't always remember. And they just might not have a memory of it. But the more you can bring it up, the more as questions emerge for that client as to, well, why and what's the value and do I need this? You have enough time to like walk them through the process so that when they change, they don't feel blindsided. So definitely 3 to 6 months if you can go a little bit longer because I work on an annual basis. I have a lot more time. But if you have just a few checkpoints and even if you don't have a lot of time with clients, but you can schedule a checkpoint and say, hey, I know we brought this up. Do you want to have another 15-minute call at X time, X date, to talk about this again if you have any questions? Showing that you care about price sensitivity, I think matters even more than the cost itself sometimes. So those would be my recommendations.
Now, when it comes to actually raising the rate, some of this is just learning basic negotiating skills. Now, some of the times as freelancers, we're lucky for two reasons. One, occasionally that gets hashed out via email. So you don't have to actually be on the phone or face to face with anybody in order to have this conversation, which gives you space to take a breath, collect yourself, all of that. It also means that we get a lot of experience with negotiating. Now, I do want to point out if you have a big negotiation coming up, I recommend you squeeze in as much practice as you can. And that could look like role playing with a friend of yours who has experience with negotiating. That could look like going into a coffee shop 30 minutes before they close, ordering a coffee, and then saying, could I actually also have a pastry at 50% off since you're going to be throwing those out at the end of the day? Just little ways. The worst they're going to tell you is no. And then you decide whether you want to pay full price for the day old pastry. But just little things you can do. Maybe you just realize that your cable bill went up and you call the company and try to negotiate the rate back down. Just anything you can do to get practice, especially if you are newer at this and just getting used to it. Now, the other side is if you are somebody who is preparing to have an actual conversation with a client when you discuss rates, one of the most crucial things to remember is that silence is so powerful. To state your rate and then stop talking. And I'm going to illustrate that if you said, I'm so excited that you want to be working together. I looked at the scope of work for this project and I have decided that, for XYZ reasons, my rate for this would be $5,000. That was 5 seconds. It felt like an eternity on my end. I'm not sure how it felt to you, but that felt like a very long time. And because people who have a lot of experience with negotiating also know this, sometimes to remember silence is powerful and to remember that it makes the other person feel uncomfortable, we have to just not undercut ourselves, because if they don't respond right away, 3 seconds starts to feel like an eternity. And then you might say, but if that's not in your budget, then we can have a conversation about it. And you have now immediately undercut yourself.
Yeah.
So just remember, silence is powerful, not in the way of like sitting across from somebody and not being willing to make a first opening bid. Sometimes it's really helpful to set an anchor point and say, this is how much I would charge, especially if you've done the research, you know what the market would bear, you know how much you want to charge. It's not a standoff with the person, but once you say your number, shh, stop talking. All right. Another big part of this too is what happens when you get turned down. So it's been brought up a few times, strategies for when clients either argue to knock down your rates or decide to walk away, because that can be very emotional. So first, when it comes to actually setting rates and trying to figure out how to handle somebody who's trying to knock down your rate, Uchechi, I'm curious, what are some of the strategies you've had?
As I told you at the beginning, I've knocked down my rate before and I saw how resentful I was. So I do not let people knock down my rate. That's really what it is. I use my discernment, right? So one thing I do tend to ask folks is, do you have a budget for X? Sorry, I need to take a little.
Bless you.
Yeah, thank you. So do you have a budget for X? Based on what they share, I will know what I can even charge, right? Sometimes, like a few months ago, I did a workshop with a nonprofit. It's an American nonprofit, but it's based in Ghana, and it's a nonprofit. And I know that at least this nonprofit's funds were not as strong as the Red Cross, for example, right? So I know what I'm getting into, and I charged them something that I felt was truly meaningful for me, but might not be as much as I charge someone else. And I felt good about that. And they met me at that place, right? So I always just tend to think, what rate would I truly be happy about for the work that I'm willing to do? And if someone wants something a little bit less, I tend to have a few services that I can offer of like, oh, well, you don't want to pay X. Well, then I can give you Y. And this is the value of that. And this is what it will cover, right? If you find that people want a top tier service but aren't going to pay for it, just like don't provide it. Honestly, it takes up your time and your energy, and like you really don't have to fight about that. Um I had this teacher once who always said, "Some will, some won't. Who's next?"
I love that.
Yeah, some will, some won't. Who's next?
That
So,
also, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead. Keep in mind. Go ahead.
Well, it ties into, we talked about this previously, and kind of back to the pain and suffering tax idea. Sometimes it's important to think about your resentment level. Would
Absolutely.
taking on a particular client cause you a certain amount of resentment? So for people who are thinking about knocking down their rates, also consider mentally, how is this going to make you feel? If you reduce a rate and you know this person is also probably going to be a bit of a tedious or difficult client, how resentful are you going to feel every time you have to do this work? Because that makes the work a heck of a lot harder. So if you are going to discount your rate for some reason, it really should be for a client that provides benefit to you as well. They're easy to work with. They pay on time and consistently. Perhaps they provide networking opportunity, or they're going to put you on a platform that also will probably yield other contacts or other opportunities. Those are some of the reasons to possibly reduce a rate, Or maybe it's part of kind of the charitable giving arm of your business, if you want to think about it this way. Maybe
Yeah.
sometimes you do pro bono work. But otherwise, if it's just because for whatever reason in this particular season you're feeling desperate and you're going to feel resentful, perhaps that time, if you financially can bear it out for a little bit longer, would be better put trying to find a better, higher quality client or a different kind of gig. And I also just want to make a point, because we're going to run out of time here shortly. In this negotiation, I said, having a conversation, be silent, all of that. And some people have come in asking about contracts. And somebody, thank you, Edwin, for saying, be safe, put changes in writing. Also, be safe, always have a contract.
Yes.
You can negotiate verbally what that rate's going to be, but then put the rate in writing, have a contract. There are a bunch of different templates online if you want just kind of 1-2 pagers that, as long as both parties have signed, should be binding. Maybe your client already has a contract, just make sure you actually read it. You could look at the guild, see what kind of options they have, but just please make sure you have things in writing and signed contracts when it comes to taking on a new client.
Completely agree.
All right. So just trying to get into a few questions that were pre-submitted. Feel free to pop any more in the questions, but
Let's see.
we talked about the pros and cons of having a friends and family rate, working for a nonprofit versus for-profit client rate. Anything else you want to add on that topic?
I feel like I saw a question about sliding scale. I think there's some pros and cons. Pros can be that you feel that you have some space to serve folks that maybe wouldn't be able to afford your normal rate. I would say absolutely cap it at like, this is how many people I can do at this. When you have a whole business that's running on a sliding scale, I think that a few things when we have sliding scale, sometimes we tend to attract a lower paying client. And if you do the cost of being you and you realize you need a higher paying client for all the obligations in your life, I don't want you to feel so burdened by this. Secondly, that can make your income a lot more variable if you have a little bit too much fluctuation and you don't absolutely need it. So if you also find that there are other ways that you can do the work by providing less or just being in the community without having to tie your business model and even your brand to sliding scale, which is a little bit hard to walk back when you're like, hey, I just got this flat rate or a higher price, then I would say find some other ways or just cap it at like I do 3 sliding scales every year and just make that more clear.
I totally agree. And one thing that is really important to address before we go is what happens if people don't pay. And I first want to say, if part of this question was also they're omitting author bylines on published works. This is why it's important to have a contract. If it's important to you to have a byline for depending on what kind of writing that you're doing, make sure that's very clear in your contract. So if your client has signed that, then you can bring up, hey, this is what we agreed to. Could you please explain why you're omitting my byline from XYZ work? But also, if it comes to a client who is not paying, there are obviously different levels of how intense you can take it, all the way to like a small claims court, which could be more costly than the invoice itself, depending on the situation. Know the laws of your state. Are there freelancer laws that actually protect you? In New York City, the Freelancers Union does some great work around that. Also, the Authors Guild has some wonderful legal resources. Reach out to people. And if you're willing to burn a bridge, I understand why sometimes people take it to social media to call someone out, but just be aware if other potential clients see you doing that, that could harm potential reputation for other business in the future. So you want to try to take every other recourse first before it's a big name and shame and name, however way that expression works, game.
And I will also say try and get more money up front.
Mm-hmm.
Just that. If you're in a business where you feel like you do run a risk of people not paying in the end, get more money up front or pay in full up front. And we didn't mention this so much, but there are other pricing models that are not just hourly. You can charge on a retainer basis, you can charge on an annual basis, and then have like fill the hours as they come, especially because work tends to spill over. So yeah, I always get as much as I can, right? Try and get stuff up front or work with people that are incredibly reputable that would not want to sully their reputation in that way.
And I just want to read out loud what was just dropped in. Thank you, Johnny. Of FYI, the Authors Guild doesn't just review book contracts. Our legal team can look at any writing contracts and help with non-paying clients. So
Love it.
again, remembering the resources that you have at your disposal, get your money, understand what the market will bear, and charge it.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for coming and tuning in today. We had so many questions. I really appreciate it. I know we couldn't get to all of them, but I really hope that this was incredibly helpful and that every single person will go and raise at least one rate after this conversation.
Just one. Thank you all. It's really a pleasure being here.